First up is application number 2704. Luxco Incorporated has filed an application for an A1 agricultural district plan unit development for distilled spirits storage facilities on 182.592 acres at 421 Cane Run Loop, 427 Cane Run Loop, and 4657 Springfield Road, US 150. Good evening, I'm Crystal Hagan, the Planning Commission Chairman and Hearing Officer tonight. This meeting is a public hearing on zoning map amendments. This hearing will be the only opportunity for comments and testimony on the proposed applications. In order for this hearing to be orderly and constructive, please listen carefully to the following public hearing guidelines. For each application, I will introduce the application and ask the director to provide a presentation. I will then ask the applicant to present his or her application, witnesses, and/or exhibits. After the applicant finishes their presentation, then I will ask if any audience member has any questions of the applicant. Only one person at a time may speak so that everyone may hear his or her questions. Anyone wishing to ask a question should wait to be recognized, then come before the audience and commission, state your name and address as clearly as possible for the record, and ask any questions. The applicant may respond and ask any questions of that person testifying. After all the questions have been asked, then I will ask if any audience members want to make any comments, pro or con, on the application. The applicant may address and/or respond to any of the comments and may ask questions of any person making a comment. The Planning Commission asks that all questions and comments pertain to the proposed zoning map amendment being considered, and the Commission will only allow relevant comments or questions. Please avoid redundant questions or comments, as they only make for an unnecessarily long meeting and transcript. After the public hearing on each application, I will close the public hearing and ask the Planning Commission to discuss and make the recommendation on the application. The Planning Commission may table any application tonight for further review and discussion of the testimony and evidence presented during the public hearing. If the Planning Commission makes a recommendation on the map amendment tonight, its recommendation may become final and the map amendment shall be automatically implemented, subject to the provisions of KRS 100.347 as set forth in Planning Commission recommendations, unless within 21 days of the Planning Commission's final action tonight. Any aggrieved person files a written request with the Planning Commission that the final decision shall be made by the appropriate legislative body, or the appropriate legislative body files a notice with the Planning Commission that the legislative body shall decide the map amendment. If the legislative body chooses to decide the map amendment, the legislative body shall take final action upon a proposed zoning map amendment within 90 days of the Planning Commission's recommendation. Thank you for your cooperation and attendance. The Planning Commission Director will swear in all persons wishing to testify tonight. She will also swear in all witnesses. She will review the rules of procedure for all wishing to testify.
So tonight, since we have a large group tonight, we'll follow our contested public hearing procedures. The applicant will have up to 60 minutes to provide their presentation. At that point, the chairman will allow for questions only after the presentation of the applicant. There will be a time for cross-examination, so the applicant will have up to 15 minutes for cross-examination of anyone that's asking a question, and that will be questions only at that time. So if you just have a general comment, we'll hold that till later. If there's anyone here representing that has organized opposition, if you are legally representing a group, then you are also allowed to provide a presentation up to 60 minutes, but you do have to have legal authority to represent a group, and that group needs to be in attendance if they're here so that they can state that you're representing them. If you have the general public wants to provide comments, each general public member will have up to 5 minutes to provide their comments. We do ask that you limit your comments if they're redundant, those comments have already been made. If you'll just state what your comment is, and so that we don't have this long hearing and transcript. After the chairman has taken all of the testimony and evidence, then the applicant will have up to 15 minutes to rebut that. any opposing testimony, and then also the opposition will have their closing statement, and then the applicant will have up to 15 minutes for a closing statement. We will follow these. We will have a timer. We ask that you follow the time limits that we've set aside. Everybody will, even if you didn't sign the speaker form, you will have the opportunity to speak. So if something comes up and you didn't sign the speaker form, but we will go down the list first, and then if you decide that you want to make a comment at the end, even though you're not registered, that's fine. For all those, we usually do one large swearing in, and so if you do plan to speak for or against the applications, if you'd raise your right hand to be sworn in. Do you swear or affirm testimony you're about to give is the truth to the best of your knowledge? If so, say I do.
I do.
For those of you that were not sworn in and you decide to, then we'll swear you in at the time that you decided to speak.
Is the applicant here?
The applicant is here. I didn't know if there was a staff report preliminary or...
Yeah, I can provide that. So everybody will need to speak up. I'm sorry that we do not have a microphone tonight. But so if you have a hard time hearing, let me know. Just hold your hand up, or point to your ear, and we'll ask Jim to speak up. So because sometimes we have a hard time hearing him. But I am going to present my staff report. It is normal for the staff to do a report for the Planning Commission, just basically laying out the application. This application is a planned unit development. It is what it says it is. It is supposed to come in as a planned unit development. These regulations are new regulations. They just went into effect in Nelson County for distilled spirit storage facilities. I've gone through the entire submittal. They have submitted everything that was required under the new regulations, and I can go through those if somebody would like those to be. But I'm sure Jim will go through those in all the exhibits. But it is located within a suburban residential neighborhood based on the current comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan lays out specific areas where certain uses are to be allowed by use. This is located on Springfield Road. It'll have an entrance off of Cane Run Loop. The applicant has voluntarily agreed that will not be used as an entrance for the proposed industrial use. The entrance will be located off of Springfield Road. There are the public services and infrastructure. The proposed use will have their own water available, a water supply, and it will be adequate for all fire protection. Stormwater management, the county engineer has reviewed the stormwater management plans and has given approval of those based on what was submitted. A portion of this property along Cane Run Loop is located within the special flood hazard area. However, their development will not be located within that 100-year floodplain. And then as for the PUD designation, Jim will go through those on behalf of the applicant of all the criteria that was required under the regulations.
Good afternoon. My name is Jim Willett. I'm an attorney with the Bardstown law firm of Saltzman, Willett, Deaton, and Hamilton. Representing the applicant this afternoon, Luxco, Inc., which is probably familiar to most all of you as the Lux Road Distillery located on East John Rowan Boulevard. I am accompanied this afternoon by several representatives of the company. Tony Kamer, who's the operations manager for the local distillery, Mike Templin, who is with corporate for Luxco, Inc., Robin Mills, who's a project engineer with Busick Construction on this project, and I think one other representative from Busick Construction, Summer Talbot. I want to thank you for your attendance this afternoon. I know this is a special meeting and goes above and beyond your normal duties as Planning Commission members, and we appreciate it and wouldn't have asked for the special meeting were it not concerning an important matter for what I think is a valued corporate citizen in Nelson County. Luxco and Luxco Distillery have been here, I think, since 2015. They've created quite a picturesque operation here. They've been they've become an important employer for the locality. Also a great destination for the bourbon tourism, which has been such an important asset to this community over the past few years. With regard to the project, very briefly, and I'll not go through the entire application or staff report, but I'll hit the highlights, and if anybody has any specific questions, I'll be glad to address those if I can. This is a 182.59 acre property located to the south of US Highway 150 Springfield Road. It has current access off of Cane Run Loop, which, as the director pointed out, part of this project will involve not using that road and that access for any industrial purpose. It will be limited to residential and emergency use only if fire protection or ambulances are needed. So that will be a commitment by the company. It does involve a new exit off of Springfield Road, which we have submitted to the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, who has given their blessing to the entrance and use of US 150 in that area. It's also been reviewed by the county engineer for adequacy in terms of roadway surface, both for existing, which US 150 is a major arterial that is obviously built for traffic of the type contemplated. So this property was acquired by Luxco in February of this year. It was acquired for the express purpose of constructing warehouses or distilled spirits storage facilities, as I think the regulations refer to them, on that property. At the time of that acquisition, the construction and use of warehouses on that property was a permitted use under the A1 agricultural zone designation. Since that time, there is, you all are very much aware, there's been a change to the regulations that now requires plan unit development designation for the construction of those warehouses within an A1 agricultural district. I should state at the time that Luxco acquired this property, again before the change to the regulations, Nelson Fiscal Court actually adopted an inducement resolution and an agreement with Luxco to incorporate this project into a industrial revenue bond series for specifically warehouse construction and use. So those regulations have changed, and we are still relying upon the county and fiscal court to abide by those agreements. The site plan, which has been provided, basically goes through the mandatory requirements under the new zoning regulations. And if I can not reduce this in size, you should have a copy of the site development plan available to you. But it does show the proposed location of 5 warehouses. It also has, as the only other structures that I'm aware of on the property, a firehouse and pump house and storage tank for fire suppression purposes. The development plan is also notable for the conservation and agricultural areas that are designated on the plat. I think those total in excess of 48 acres out of the total of 182 acres. It also provides for a minimum 200-foot buffer from all boundary lines of any structures on the premises, as well as a minimum 400-foot buffer from any residential structure on an adjoining property. All warehouses will have sprinklers for fire protection. There is drainage containment provided as part of the project, and that has been reviewed and approved by the appropriate governmental body. We have reviewed the staff report that has been provided to you. We agree with the findings and recommendations of that report in general, and with its analysis. And I guess what I should say is procedurally, and it's noted in the staff report, this process is to be the same as it were a zoning request from a procedural standpoint, but this is not a zone change. This property is going to stay zoned A1 agricultural. It's just the fact that the new regulations allow plan unit development use for distilled spirit storage facilities. So the zoning is not going to change. Also, we'll note that the change to the regulations was not accompanied by any change to the adopted Nelson County Comprehensive Plan. So there is something of a gap between the adopted comprehensive plan, the fact that it has not been updated in some period of time, and the recent change to the regulations. So for that reason, I think it's very important to look at the regulations that were adopted by fiscal court, and it specifically identifies distilled spirit storage facilities, or whiskey warehouses, if you will, within agricultural zoned areas. Also noted by the staff report is that the comprehensive plan does anticipate certain industries may be allowed in non-industrial areas, as such uses may warrant specific consideration. That's obviously been the position of fiscal court in giving these facilities special treatment under the zoning regulatory scheme. So for that reason, among others, we contend that the application is fully consistent with the adopted comprehensive plan and the goals and intentions and reasons for the change to the regulations that fiscal court has imposed. Speaking specifically of the new regulation, which is set forth in Article 6.1D, subparagraph 4 of the zoning regulations, and I want to quote from that. The very introduction to that is, the purpose of this designation is to allow distilled spirits storage facilities within rural areas while minimizing the impact of the proposed use upon surrounding areas and protecting the character of the area. And I would contend that this application does meet those requirements in all respects. As you are also aware, the zoning regulation does set forth 10 mandatory requirements for the plan unit development application. And I'll just address those briefly, all of which are either incorporated into the site development plan that's depicted up here and has been filed, or within the various exhibits that we filed as a part of the application. So briefly addressing those, this is obviously a property of greater than 100 acres. The structures proposed for this property will be rack-supported warehouse structures, or rick houses as they're more commonly referred to, at least in this area. Those structures will be protected by an automatic fire suppression system or sprinklers. They will fall under the maximum 40,000 square foot footprint allowed for those structures. They will be constructed in accordance with the Kentucky Building Code. They do provide, as I mentioned before, for the 200-foot setback from property lines, any structure from those property lines, and also a 400-foot minimum setback from residential structures on adjoining properties. The regulation only talks about residential structures on adjoining properties. There is a residence located on this property that will remain in use probably for up to 5 years for the original owner of the property, but the regulation doesn't concern itself with that, and that use will ultimately be abandoned as the project proceeds. The site development plan does provide for the landscape required under the zoning regulation along the streetscape, which will be the new entrance off of US 150, which if you look at the site plan is to the extreme right of that exhibit. Again, that has been reviewed and permitted, approved, at least preliminarily by the Transportation Cabinet and the county road engineer. Additionally, it more than satisfies the requirement that 25% of the property be dedicated to agricultural or conservation easement use. Let me try to shrink this down, and I'm not sure that you can see it, but this property is characterized by a very significant tree and vegetative growth around virtually all of the perimeter of the property, all of which is intended to be preserved to the fullest extent possible. And around the entire perimeter of the property are the conservation easement areas, which again total in excess of 48 acres. That provides a buffer from any adjoining property, almost entirely screens it from use, except that these will be structures of up to 60 feet in height. So the roofs may be visible, but for the most part, they're going to be screened from view, certainly from US 150 and any adjoining properties. I've already spoken to the roadway adequacy analysis that's required under the zoning regs that have been met, and further to that point, the traffic proposed for this project has been provided to the traffic engineer that regularly serves the Planning Commission, who has determined that there's no further study required based on the level of this site development plan as it currently exists. There is an area designated for future development that, if anything happens with that, that'll have to be the subject of an application that goes through this exact same process. But that has not been fully developed, and it's not before the Planning Commission this evening. Also, with respect to traffic, I should also state that this project, because there are warehouses for the storage of barreled distilled spirits, they involve very little traffic and very little on-site employee activity. The applicant, Luxco, anticipates probably 5 trucks in, 5 trucks out, so 10 trucks per day of truck traffic, and then employment level on the property is sporadic, up to probably not as much as 10 people per time. They are on site as they unload trucks, load the warehouses, and as I'm sure, feel like most of you all are aware, those warehouses basically remain dormant almost for whatever period of time they're going to age the product, whether that be 4, 6, 8, 18, 20, whatever years. So there's not a lot of in and out activity planned in that respect, and certainly not anything that would rise to the level of concern from a impact on traffic in the area. I have provided to you this evening and would like to introduce at this time a proposed motion to approve the application for your consideration, just because I know it's hard to sometimes listen to me drone along and then pick out all of the elements that you want to address. So trying to keep it short and to the point and being respectful of your time, I'll just say in concluding that on the basis of the evidence and the testimony presented, we contend that the application is in agreement with the adopted comprehensive plan, is entirely consistent with the regulations recently adopted by the Planning Commission and Fiscal Court, is also entirely consistent with the stated purpose of the plan unit development regulations in terms of minimizing impact on adjoining land uses and lack of any significant impact to the character of the area in which this project is being located. And then finally, I will state, and in agreement with the staff report, the application meets all of the mandatory criteria for the plan unit development designation that we've requested. For those reasons, we respectfully ask that you recommend approval of the Luxco application as requested. That will comprise my initial presentation. I welcome any questions you might have.
That will be applicant exhibit M.
Thank you.
Does anyone have a question? Please raise your hand.
You'll need to come forward.
If you will come up to the middle where the microphone, where we're recording.
I'm not comfortable with this at all. I'm not even sure how I want to phrase my question. I pulled my pen only out, sorry, you want me to stop?
That's fine.
Yeah.
State your name and address for the record, please.
Andrea Darby, 1806 Poplar Flat Road. So I only pulled my pen out after I heard you make a statement, and so I can't quote you exactly, but it said something like you, whatever, the plans are going to maintain the integrity and character of the surrounding area. Can you restate that so that I'm saying that properly?
No,
Do you remember that bullet
that's-
point?
Sure.
Did I say it correctly?
Fairly close.
Okay, fairly
Yeah.
close.
Yeah.
So that's what made me pull my pen out. I really question how that's maintaining the integrity and character of the surrounding area. To me, you are plopping this huge industry in the middle of a surrounding suburban, as you said, suburban rural neighborhood. Houses all the way around. We have suddenly lost value.
Ma'am, we're in the question phase, so can you ask a question, and then if you want to...
Okay, how is that maintaining integrity and character of our surrounding area?
Well, this is warehouses as of the type proposed are very low intensity uses. I think it can very validly be argued that they're agricultural in nature. The entire process of distilling spirits has its roots in agriculture. It is a process of taking agricultural products and turning them into a manufactured product, all of which occurs off-site in an industrial facility. It's just the aging that is determined appropriate by the Fiscal Court and Planning Commission to be appropriate for a rural area, and that's actually stated in the zoning regulation itself. Beyond that, these are very, very low intensity use facilities, much less intense in terms of intensity of use than, for example, a residential subdivision that would be appropriate under the comprehensive plan for that area. I mean, taken to its logical conclusion, there could be a residential subdivision of 250 to 350 homes located there, all of which would be much more intrusive upon and impactful upon the area. So that's, in general, the basis for that statement.
Okay. I would like to, since I have to ask questions, I would like to know why you picked this location and not something similar to the Heaven Hill Preserve that is way out in the middle of a huge open agricultural area. And to me, that would be more logical of a location. Why did you pick this area?
Well, I can't, there are probably so many reasons that I wasn't a party to that I could refer to, but there is a lack of industrial property in the county.
So maybe another county would have been better.
In spite of, it is in the county, ma'am, I'm sorry.
No, I said, but another county maybe
Okay.
then would have been better.
Well, that's not practical for the use to which Luxco intends to devote the property. I mean, Luxco has a beautiful facility immediately adjacent to John Rowan Boulevard,
I'm familiar.
immediately adjacent to the city limits of Bardstown. It is pastoral in look and character and low-intensity use, all of which is very appropriate for the area that is, and even more so in a more rural area where this property is located.
And I agree with that location. I don't see it surrounded by neighborhoods like I do the location you're placing this.
Well, I'm going to beg to differ. There is a very nice and substantial residential neighborhood immediately adjacent to the Luxco Distillery facility. It's known as Tullamore. They have coexisted peacefully for the last 7 or 8 years without problem or complaint that anybody has heard. So it is compatible with residential use. Luxco values its relationship and its good relationship with its neighbors, and that's a prime example of the lack of any significant impact upon adjoining property owners for this, whether they be agricultural, which the majority of it is, or business, or certainly residential.
So am I allowed to ask a question of you?
You can present the question.
How come I only hear about this in the past week? Why wasn't this public hearing made, I guess, when was this announced? Because this is not a good turnout, and I know this does not represent what is being posted on social media.
Okay, so under Kentucky Revised Statute, Chapter 100, which is the enabling legislation for the Planning Commission, there's 3 ways of notice that are required by law for the Planning Commission to make. One is a legal notice has to go in the local newspaper, which would be the standard, which was completed.
When?
I would have to look.
Approximate?
I'll have to get Alicia to look that up. But we are required to put that in the paper no less than 7 days, no more than 21 days from the public hearing.
Okay, so that gives me a range.
The second notification is to immediately adjoining property owners. That notice is mailed by regular mail to immediately adjoining property owners, has to be mailed out 14 days prior to the public hearing. And then the third way is that there is a notice or a sign that's posted on the property, which is required to go out at around the same time as the adjoining property owner notice is mailed.
Okay. So,
And then also, as part of the regulation, the new regulation, one of the requirements was the applicant is required to hold a meeting with the adjoining property owners prior to submitting their application, which they did conduct that meeting, and they had to submit evidence that it was mailed out to the adjoining property owners, who it was mailed to, along with a copy of the notice to those adjoining property owners. So if you weren't within the immediately adjoining property owner, you would not have received a written notice from the Planning Commission or the applicant. You would have had to receive notice either by the sign on the property or in the newspaper.
okay. So I obviously have no understanding of how this all works, or how people get to purchase land and make all the plans and then come to a meeting like this. So to me, this seems like it's a done deal. I don't understand how this can be.
Well, we're following the enabling legislation that the General Assembly has provided to the Planning Commission, and so we follow the procedures that are set. And then the fiscal court also provides the regulation, which is the new regulation for the planned unit development. Previously, you would not have received, there wouldn't have been a public hearing at all. So previously, they were allowed, the one on Heaven Hill that was just, I think you brought up, the one on Louisville Road, there was no public hearing required on that at all. It was a permitted use. They were allowed to do it without a public hearing. They just had to submit plans to the office. We checked them to make sure it met the minimum requirements, and they were issued a permit for it. So the regulation has now changed to allow for public comment through the public hearing process. So otherwise, until the spring, previously, they would have been able to come through without any public hearing.
Okay. I'm not gonna drag this out. I'm not happy. That's all.
And she said August 23rd is the notice in the paper.
Do we have another question? Sir, if you'll come forward, please.
Thank you.
And state your name and address for the record, please.
It's Frances Lawson at 4821 Springfield Road in Bardstown, Kentucky, 40004. And I have a follow-up question to the question that she asked regarding the character and integrity of the area. And in your presentation, you stated that warehouses are agricultural in nature, but you also mentioned that they're 60 feet in height. Is that correct?
That's the maximum permitted under the zoning regulation.
And what is the average height of a barn in an agricultural community?
They vary quite a bit.
Would you say they are 60 feet in height?
Not usually, no.
Okay. Is that in keeping with the character of the area as it is?
I certainly think so. And I think it's obvious if you look at the existing Luxco facility that that's the nature of that type of operation.
And while it's in keeping with the nature of the distillery's warehousing operation, would you agree that it is not in keeping, again, with the character, because the height will block the view as it is now?
No, I can't agree with that. The proposed structures are located a significant distance away from any property line, from any adjoining landowner, any residents. They're located a significant distance off of the highway, which, as most of us know, that highway is going to be moved in the not too distant future, which will make it even more remote to the site from the traveling public. And again, I mean, you all have referenced the Barrel Preserve to the north of Bardstown at Cox's Creek. I mean, that's a very pastoral, agricultural scene. These regulations were tailored by the Planning Commission and Fiscal Court to preserve the agricultural viewshed in the county. I think they've done a very good job of that, and I think that this application certainly tracks along those intentions.
Okay. You are stating that the distance from the road and the adjoining property, again, keeps with the character and integrity of the area despite the height. As residents, we can't see the barns, but we will be able to see the distillery.
Ma'am, it's not the distillery, they're warehouses.
Oh, excuse me, the warehouses. We will be able to see those,
You can
whereas
see
now we
them.
have a view of the agricultural land, and now we will view warehouses.
And again, I think that's much more appropriate and pleasant than some of the commercial operations out there, whether they be convenience type operations, used car facilities. I mean, this is more in keeping with the agricultural viewshed for rural areas than a lot of what's already existing in that area of US 150.
Okay, would you agree that the commercial properties that exist, the convenience stores, grocery stores, and the car sales benefit the community because they provide a service to the community, whereas the warehouse does not provide a service to the community?
No, I don't agree with that at all. I mean, these are, I've spoken already to the fact that Luxco Distillery has become a valued corporate citizen in terms of employment, in terms of the tax base that it provides to the county. These facilities will be significant additions to the tax rolls for this county. So yes, for those reasons and others, I would suggest that they do provide a very significant benefit to the community.
Okay, following up on your statement, how many jobs are created or employment opportunities have been brought to the county by Luxco?
I would say in the neighborhood of 60.
If you'll stand up for me, state your name and address for the record, please.
Tony Kamer, 2009 Clear Creek Drive, Boston, Kentucky. We're around 60 currently, and with this expansion, that would, which is why we're building these warehouses, we get up to around 75 to 90 employees.
And then you talk about our tax revenue. How much tax revenue does the operation bring into the county?
I can't address that. I mean, it's very significant. You're talking about structures, the price for which ranges between 3 and 5 million very easily. I mean, the property taxes on that alone are very significant. You have employment tax, occupational tax, income tax. I mean, you would have to have a CPA here for a very long period of time for me to be able to address that in any greater detail.
Okay, so you don't have an exact dollar amount, just very significant?
Yes, I think that's beyond question.
No, it isn't. I asked a specific question regarding what that brings to our community. You are stating the value and the benefit to the community, and it's important that the community understands what exactly that value and benefit is. And he was able to answer the prediction of up to 90 employees, and I was asking about the tax revenue.
And I would suggest that that's not an appropriate consideration for land use planning.
Do you have another question to ask?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Come on up, sir, please.
Hi, Samuel Lawson, 4821 Springfield Road. My first question, sir, in regards to your statement about maintaining the integrity of the area, can you tell me how many sites in the area and or properties are considered eligible right now for listing on the National Register of Historic Places?
I do not know that, but this project will not have any adverse impact on it.
So the fact that there are 11 properties that you do not know about shows that you have no intention of maintaining the integrity of our community. My second question would be, since the Pediatric Environmental Health Specialty Unit of Kentucky and the Indiana Board of Health have mandated and recommended that N95 masks be used, gloves, and respirators when dealing with whiskey fungus to protect the employees dealing with it, how do you plan on protecting the community from such a thing?
Well, you mentioned the Indiana Health Department study, which has determined that which you referred to as whiskey fungus, which is actually a naturally occurring microflora that exists throughout North America, Europe, and Asia, naturally occurring without regard to whether there are distilled spirits facilities there. They have determined that there is no adverse health impact from that. Now, just like you would want to protect yourself, you know, if you're eating rocks or something, you don't want to directly ingest anything like that, but it has been determined to lack any adverse impact on human or animal health.
I'm sorry, I'm just finding my spot in my notes here. So then you do not agree with the court in Tennessee that recently blocked the construction of a Jack Daniels warehouse due to similar citizen concerns about the health and environmental issues that are related to whiskey fungus, which is considered Bowdonia comtniensis.
That is a gross overstatement and oversimplification of that litigation. It has no bearing on property located in Kentucky and no bearing on the use of this specific property. My understanding is that court action was directed to the fact that they were deficient in their application for building permits as opposed to anything else. there was no determination of adverse impact on health or anything of that nature.
Can you tell me how many endangered species the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife has listed in the Botland area?
I would again suggest that's not relevant to this. This will be a permitted facility, both in terms of air quality permits, water quality permits. It has been reviewed and approved by local authorities with respect to drainage containment and lack of adverse impact on the watershed. So yes, a great deal of attention has been directed toward those issues, and this facility is and will remain in compliance with all requirements.
So as a representative of the community, you keep telling me that my issues are not valid. Just to let you know, the Indiana bat, the gray bat, and the northern long-eared bat all live in the Botland area.
Sir, do you have a question?
Oh, yes, ma'am. My
Okay.
question leads into this.
Okay.
These species are of vital ecological importance and essential for maintaining the health and balance of our ecosystem. What are your plans to protect the 63 stream channels that are underneath Botland that these water feed into?
There should not be any adverse impact to the water table, and you mentioned the Indiana study. That a part of that study also determined that any migration of alcohol into the ground dissipates as a function of normal biodegradation to where it does not have any adverse impact. So,
But these species will be affected by your construction activities, which include erosion, sedimentation, and contamination of these streams that will happen.
that is not
I
accurate.
yield my time. Thank you.
Next question.
Sam Hutchins, 542 Greer Lane, Bardstown. My question concerns the water line that will service this facility. And I realize it's a low impact once it's in operation. But our water in the Botland area is limited right now at best. My question is, do you plan on updating that line from the bottom of the hill at Woodlawn Road up beyond your property to maintain our water supply and our water pressure? We lost the water tank years ago, so the pressure is kind of iffy. So I guess my question would be more to the Luxco Road guys. Do you intend on expanding that water line from Woodlawn Road up to where your facility starts?
We've not been advised of any need to do so. Part of this project, I mean, you yourself acknowledged that this is a very low water use project.
I agree, except for one thing.
Can I finish?
Let him finish.
Go ahead.
Okay. There is a storage tank provided by the site development plan. So there will be a very brief period where that is filled, but otherwise, other than flushing toilets, there will be no adverse or no significant water use from the facility.
Unless there is a fire, which we know from past experiences can and possibly will happen. I'm saying that my question is, can you not go ahead and update that as part of your facility in order to ensure that we, beyond that point, don't lose our water pressure, is one question.
I'm not an expert in the area, but I do have an understanding that fire suppression is not going to be supplied from any water line and wouldn't be adequate for that type of fire anyway. That's why the Kentucky Building Code was amended, I think, in 1997 to provide specifically for fire protection for the area and for the areas of these warehouses in terms of drainage spill containment, proximity to other structures, fire suppression and the like. And all of those have been great additions to the requirements for building within Kentucky, specifically these type of warehouses. So Again, no significant degradation of the water supply to the area.
And you don't think filling that thing will cause an issue? Filling, your tank is how big? I saw it's 54 feet in diameter. How many thousand gallons we talking about? 500,000? Okay. Next question would be about the lighting on the warehouses themselves. What are they going to have as far as area lighting?
So Sam, as part of the PUD requirements, they were required to submit their lighting fixtures. They will all be, they will have some pole lighting, all of them will, and then the exterior building lighting will be fully cut off fixtures. Everything will be completely downlit on the property and within the area where the rick houses will be, and there will not be any light.
So it can't exceed so many feet beyond
Correct.
the warehouse
Right.
itself?
Right.
Okay. And then regarding your statement about your taxes, y'all aren't going to pay property taxes at all on this. And liquid spirits tax will disappear in a few years. So as far as a tax incentive for doing this, it's solely for the company. It doesn't help the people in Nelson County.
That's not an accurate statement.
I think so. I mean, it has been in the past, and I'm sure it will continue.
If I might address the question.
Go ahead.
Distilled spirits tax has been modified recently where, not for 2 years, but after 2 years, it starts to phase out. These properties will either be subject to those, or Luxco has entered into an agreement with Nelson County called a pilot agreement, which stands for payment in lieu of taxes. So whatever disappears in terms of the distilled spirits tax is going to be made up through that pilot agreement by Luxco. So there's no disappearing of tax revenues. It's going to take a different form, but it is structured so as to not result in any decrease in revenues to this locale.
Okay. As long as we can trust your word on that.
It's a written agreement that I didn't sign, but I know that Luxco has.
Okay. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next question. Please come forward.
Roger Condor, 587 Greer Lane. My question is, there's a lot of land left over. We're putting 5 warehouses in now. What's going to happen when they get those 5 built? How many more are they going to build up on top of the hill? I live over on Greer Lane at the intersection of Oak and Low. Eventually, I'm out going to look out my door and see a warehouse across the field. Can they keep on adding warehouses? They fill that up. I know they got to stay so many feet from the property line, but there's still a lot of warehouses could be put in out there.
The site development plan does identify the balance of the property for future development. I think, as I stated earlier, that Luxco does intend to build additional warehouses should they be needed in the future. They would have to go through the design process, and they would also have to come before the Planning Commission and Fiscal Court under exactly the same procedures as we're going through now. I know that the design has not been pursued to anything close to completion, but there may be as many as 5 or 6 other warehouses, is my understanding. But that is not certain, and sometime in the future.
That's all I needed.
Next question. No questions? At this time, we'll take comments.
Just a reminder, you'll be limited to 5 minutes on your comments due to how many people we have. If we have additional time, if you think of something else, we'll be able to add that additional time, but we want to make sure everybody gets their comment in tonight.
So does anyone have a comment? Please raise your hand. If you would come forward, please.
Thank you. My name is Nicholas Nelson. My mailing address is 13019 Dove Point Place in Louisville, Kentucky. I have a financial interest in tract number 7, Cane Run Loop, with an address of 710 Oak Ridge Road. I'll have two comments, essentially. Frequently in the discussion, and it's in the application, under the section Exhibit A, statutory justification. Frequently, there's been the use that within the regulations, it's acceptable use for agricultural land to have these rick houses. When I look at the comprehensive plan and the process to use the comprehensive plan and the newly updated regulations, you start with the comprehensive plan first, and the comprehensive plan states that this property is in a suburban residential area. On page 4-13, under suburban community character area, third paragraph, quote, "The suburban area is limited to single-family residential developments and community facilities. Other residential and non-residential developments are not permitted within the suburban area and should be guided to nearby villages, hamlets, or crossroads, or within appropriate mixed-use developments." As I see a proper application of the planning guideline, which is supposed to guide all the other things that are decided afterwards in the decision process, that the claim that agricultural land is suitable, and because it's agricultural land, it's okay to build this right here, I don't believe that is, I disagree with the conclusion that council has provided here, because it appears that what the goal of the new regulations and the PUD application process is to properly manage these rick houses on agricultural land in rural areas. And if you look at those new regulations, you have the 100-acre minimum for a typical one, and then in areas of the county that are I forget it, it's the second, that you can have something between 50 and 100 that are non-incorporated areas of the county. There's even an exclusion at the bottom, or a claim at the bottom, that if there's any issues with the running of them, the owner of that, or that's using that property for rick houses, has to cease and desist. That's in your regulations if you look at it. So my first point is that by statutory and planning process, it appears that the claim that this is the correct use for agricultural land is incorrect, because you start with the premise of the suburban residential long-range plan says right in the document that that's what's there. And if you look at the matrix at the end of that section, there's no place where it identifies any industrial use or anything. It's supposed to be community type facilities like schools, police, things like that. So that's the first point I would like to make and ask for your consideration in that matter. That's the first one. The second point is really one of managing risk and the wisdom of the decision that's going to be made about this proposal. There have been some people already that have talked about the black fungus, and to some degree we don't know how much this installation might start black fungus to be there. And I'm not going to go into any health risks, but in various locations in the country where black fungus has started impacting areas around facilities like rick houses, very definitely it is factual that property values have declined in the area that's impacted. And the black fungus is at the very least a nuisance that has to be cleaned. So why would we, at this point, when there's a potential for that risk, maybe it's 20%, maybe it's 80%, depending on how much ethanol is going to be coming out of those at full capacity of the 5 rick houses, which are each 58,800 barrels apiece. That's 294,000 barrels, each of them somewhere around 53 gallons. At a 3 to 5% evaporation rate, that's somewhere between 467,000 and 780,000 gallons of ethanol that are going to come out of those barrels each year. And ethanol is heavier than air, so it goes on the ground and starts moving based on contours of the land and air movements. So it's going to move around. We don't know yet if it's going to cause black fungus. I know from being on the property that I have an interest in There's no black fungus there today. I know it's naturally occurring. So my challenge is it wise right now to go against the long-range plan as a suburban residential neighborhood and set a precedent to put what amounts to an industrial facility that's full of ethanol and start that precedent now rather than helping this organization find more suitable land, larger space, farther away from the city core. Thank you.
I am going to address your comment with regard to the regulations. The regulations have been amended to eliminate that conditional use permit for tracts that are 50 to 100 acres. So I understand that our website's outdated, so I apologize for that. We just haven't had a chance to update it yet. Yeah.
Information that's outdated based on what's available.
Yeah, so we just haven't been able, because this is we're still have a couple of legislative bodies that haven't adopted it yet. So we're waiting to get that adopted before we put on. So I apologize if you looked on the website and that's wrong. But the condition, there used to be a conditional use permit that would allow distilled spirits on tracts that are between 50 and 100 acres. That has been completely eliminated in the county. The only option now is 100 acres or more. I just want to clarify that.
Next comment.
Philip Pennington, 710 Oak Ridge Road, Bardstown, Kentucky. Reason I'm standing right here is I want to express my views on why I'm against the rezoning and against rickhouse development on the Cane Run Loop and Springfield Road area. The planned development site is incredibly too close to the neighboring homes and residential areas, given that land and property damage will occur because of these rickhouses due to what we've just been talking about and most people in Nelson County are familiar with, whiskey fungus. The best claims that any distillery will make, and you, sir, made yourself, is that it's naturally occurring. Claiming that something is naturally occurring doesn't mean that it's not harmful. I'll name a few things that are naturally occurring: carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, just to name a few. Those are all naturally occurring. In Luxco's application, they said that they are, quote, sensitive to any impact on neighbors and will work cooperatively to address any problems that might arise. If this is true, is Luxco prepared to install thermal oxidizers on each of those warehouses to decompose those ethanol vapors into smaller compounds like water and carbon dioxide so that they won't feed the whiskey fungus? Because that is the neighborly thing to do, and that is what some distilleries have done. They also, earlier you stated that in the where the current Luxco distillery is in the Tullamore neighborhood, that there haven't been any issues. I don't know what the definition of no issues are, but I drove to the neighborhood today, and those are beautiful homes, and they do have whiskey fungus on them. The road signs have whiskey fungus on them, and the mailboxes are just completely washed out from where they have been. Allegedly, it looks like they've probably been told to clean them with bleach, so those mailboxes are just hideous right now. You saw on there where he talked about the trees that are towards the back of the property. My property actually shares those same trees, and that forest goes onto my property. It's actually the exact reason why we bought property in Nelson County 3 years ago. It's because of those trees. We've designed our property for permaculture farming that is centered around those trees. Fruit and berry orchard, edible mushroom logs, and forest crops, plants that need years of growth to mature and produce fruit. How can we establish our greenhouses to sow and cultivate those plants for sale if the structure is constantly clouded by a layer of whiskey fungus? How can our orchard and saplings survive when they're being choked out by whiskey fungus? James A. Scott, a professor at the Dalalana School of Public Health at the University of Toronto, who has studied this fungus since 2001 and actually helped to give it its name, said in an email, "The fungus is pretty destructive, and the only way to stop it is to turn off its alcohol supply. It wrecks patio furniture, house siding, and almost any outdoor surface." He goes on to say, I've seen trees choked to death by it. Again, trees. We've met with and toured our property with a state forester to monitor and maintain our pristine wildlife habitat. We have an amazing population of native wildflowers, oak and hickory forests, which play host to endangered and threatened wildlife species like the gray bats. We're enrolling in the Natural Areas Registry program for our land's conservations. How can we be expected to maintain a diverse ecosystem when the only provided solution to maintain this is chemical power washing? How can we say in good conscience that we are well preserved and unaffected woodlands? There's also a creek that runs through our property. This creek is a source of water for a handful of our crops that we grow in our woods. Those crops' water supply is in danger when it's full of whiskey fungus. A very smart marketing person came up with the term angel share, convincing us that the vapors leave the barrels and ascend to the heavens. The fact is, those vapors create an ugly fungus that is harmful and potentially deadly to land around it. I represent a lot of neighbors who oppose this bill and fear that the damage is just going to be great to our property. There's plenty of large agricultural plots of land that can be purchased for use around the area. So I'm asking that you do not let Luxco come into this neighborhood, this residential area, and cause potential harm to the land. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike Templin, you're with Luxco. Sam, do you have another comment?
No, I'm good.
Mary Inman? No? Okay. Ann Reed?
Ann Reed, 531 Greer Lane, Washington. You mentioned that Luxco wants to keep with the aesthetics, and everyone here has mentioned to you the whiskey fungus. All we have to do is drive over to the area on New Haven Road by Barton's. All of those houses are covered in the whiskey fungus. You can see it. The homes, the stop signs, any sign, anything. All of us in Botland have chose to live there because we want the country feel. We want the trees, we want the nature, we want the landscape. We picked the country life. We do not want your brick houses. Put them somewhere else. Nelson County is full. It's full. I'm sorry that you have to drive. I worked in a warehouse. I worked at, the liquor companies. I've been there. A little bit of drive isn't going to kill you. It's not. You make millions, millions upon millions. All that money does not come back to Nelson County. You sat here and said, oh, you bring in the money, you bring in all this money. Where is it? Nelson County isn't seeing it. We have nothing here in Nelson County. Tell me, what do we have? What do you offer us? You offer us nothing. All we see is bourbon. So you're offering us that. You're offering us a bunch of stuff we can't use. We don't want it. Keep it. That's what I have to say. Keep it.
Samuel Lawson?
He asked questions.
Okay. And Francis, do you have anything else you want to add?
I do.
Okay.
But it's a form of a question to.
That's fine.
To the committee.
State your name and address again,
I'm
please.
sorry.
That's okay.
Francis Lawson, 4821 Springfield Road. And I'm not sure how to ask the question, that's part of it. We are just individual citizens. We are not familiar with the process. We don't have legal representation to help guide us in how to properly present. All we can do is come forward and express our opinions. I am concerned that we don't have the representation of the community that we know exists for several reasons. One being the time. It's at 5 o'clock, which is, people are working, they can't get off. And just like he had to leave, people, that doesn't give enough time. The other things are that rules and procedures. We don't really have information or knowledge about that. Is it possible for us to continue this meeting so that we can present more from the community, whether in the form of letters to the committee, addressing the statements that he made, if we could get a printed copy of what he said for everyone in the community that could not be here tonight but would like to be here. And if not, would you accept letters from people who, again, just could not be here?
Unfortunately, with regard to the letters, they have to be in attendance at the public hearing in order to be cross-examined.
Okay.
So unless they're here, they can't submit letters.
Could we have a second meeting at a different time than 5 o'clock where the other people could attend?
state law requires there's a 60-day time frame for which, once the application is submitted, that the planning commission must make their recommendation. And then, so I'm going to give you, if they make a recommendation tonight, so that's 60 days from the date of the application, they're required to hold the public hearing.
Right.
They may table it, they may make a recommendation to approve, or make a recommendation to deny. This body is a recommending body only. Under the fiscal court has adopted the alternative process for considering applications. Based on the recommendation that's made, there's a 21-day waiting period where either fiscal court can say they want to take final action, or an aggrieved person can file the notice with the planning commission asking for fiscal court to take final action. This is the only public hearing unless fiscal court decides they want to hold their own public hearing. So tonight will be the only, unless there's additional testimony and evidence that this board thinks that they need to request, this will be the only public hearing that will be, unless fiscal court decides they want to take action on it and hold their own hearing.
Okay, thank you. The other thing is that, as information is presented and questions are asked, the response has been, it will be, as if it's already decided, like the lighting question. And the response from the committee is, well, it will be like this, which indicates that a decision has been made.
No decision has been made. So plan unit develops are just what they say. They must be planned.
Okay.
So in order for the planning commission to make an informed decision, or for the public to know what has been presented, it must come in planned to show that they meet all of the minimum criteria. So one of the minimum criteria is that they provide their lighting specifications so that we can ensure that what they're presenting meets the minimum criteria. So there's not been any final action taken. It's just that those items have come in and we've been able to check the box that yes, they have met that minimum criteria.
Okay, and this is just another question for future meetings in other areas. Other than just voicing an opinion, what information could citizens bring that would weigh heavily or would give weight, legitimate weight, to counter these proposed?
You're able to come and present your public comment. If you wanted to be represented by legal counsel, you could. You have a right to bring witnesses with you at a public hearing. So all of that information and individuals can come to the meeting.
And at the very minimum, contact your magistrate. That's what they're there for. They're representing you on fiscal court.
Thank you for explaining that and clarifying.
Oh, no, that's all I have. Is anybody ask?
Does anybody else have a comment to make? Please come forward.
I was late because of work.
Okay. If you'd raise your right hand to be sworn in, do you swear or affirm testimony you're about to give the truth, the best of your knowledge? If so, say I do.
I do.
State your name and address for the record.
Wilma Sorrell, 1007 Holly Drive. So I live in the Popular Flat area, close to where these warehouses are going. I'm a huge proponent of the bourbon industry. It provides great jobs. However, we know once a warehouse gets built, how many jobs do they provide? Pretty much zero. So they're not providing a lot of jobs. Another thing is, being in our backyard, my husband and I left Cedar Creek 12 years ago because we got word that the quarry was coming down there. Lots of traffic. We kept getting lied to from fiscal court. We would call, they would say, Wilma, I don't know what's going on. They're just doing soil samples. There's no done deal. But we kept hearing the chatter because it was right in our back door. So as soon as we saw it hit the paper, we were like, they passed it, and we got lied to for a year through fiscal court. This has been about 12 years ago, 10 to 12 years ago. So then we came to Botland. We've loved it there. We have a wonderful neighborhood. There's no warehouses. We do have the black fungus that we have to clean continuously, even though we live probably 8 miles from the closest, not even that far. Luxco has some warehouses pretty close to us. So, but my point is we moved to an area where now there's going to be large amounts of construction. Our roads cannot sustain this construction. They cannot sustain the additional semi-truck traffic. And so we just really, really need to be conscientious about our environment, our neighbors, the roads, the traffic, the school buses that are on the roads, because of this additional warehouse traffic that is going to be happening and construction. So we've got to be mindful about what are you putting into our communities, okay? So I feel like it might already be a done deal because from my understanding, the property's already been purchased. So I don't think properties being purchased if it's not going to happen. Just my thoughts. Again, I'm a proponent of the bourbon industry. It provides great jobs. However, do I want a warehouse in my backyard? No, and I think the majority of people do not. So we really do need to look at the other exterior impacts that this is going to cause. Our roads are not great out there. I don't see the roads getting any better in the next 5 years probably. So we've got to really be conscientious about those things that are coming to hurt the environment even more. So that's all I have to say.
Anyone else have a comment? Any more comments?
One more follow-up. I didn't want to go over my 5 minutes the first time. I won't take long.
Say your name again.
Philip Pennington, 710 Oak Ridge Road, Bardstown. I wanted to follow up on what I was saying about just the trees and the nature of our land is, there is a neighborhood that backs up right to this. We're to the side of that. We're a farm. We're trying to grow our own food. We have young trees right now. We're planning to build greenhouses. And when this fungus comes over there and starts attacking our young trees, getting on our greenhouse, like I mentioned, that's affecting our livelihood. It's affecting our way of life. It's affecting how we feed ourselves. Who's going to be held accountable for that? Is Luxco going to step up and take the accountability and say, yes, we understand that your beautiful house that you just built has whiskey fungus on it. Who's going to be accountable for that? Who's going to be accountable for the 4 years of growth that we lost on our trees and the greenhouses that are null and void because they have fungus all over them? That's our way of life. It's not just we don't want to see it in our backyard. It's an eyesore that it kind of stinks, but it's that fungus is really going to be damaging to our lifestyle and our livelihood. And just kind of want to ask Luxco, where's the accountability for that as you want to be good neighbors with good faith. So that's less than it. Thank you.
State your name and address.
Ann Reed, 531 Greer Lane, Bardstown. He made a valid point about with the whiskey fungus and the cost, because we have built our livelihoods, around our homes, all this money that we've invested into our homes. My question, is Luxco going to repay us for all the costs we have to invest in cleaning our homes, our cars? Any damages that occur due to the whiskey fungus that their lawyer believes don't occur, that it's naturally occurring? As I mentioned before, when you go to Barton's and you drive by there and you see all that, it's obvious. When you go by Tullamore, that he said has no complaints, when you drive by there and you see their whiskey fungus, they are able to clean all that off, but it's at a cost. So I'm curious, when this does most likely get passed, is Luxco and all these bourbon industry companies going to start repaying all of us residents in Nelson County the cost that we have to pay to clean it? Because it is a large sum of money. And even physically, I am a sick person. I can't get out there with a pressure washer and clean my house. I can't do it. So I have to pay someone, or my husband has to come home and do that after he's worked all day. So I'm just curious if any of these industries are going to pay us. Just curious.
Can you give her an answer, please?
Can I get your name?
Keith Hutchins, Greer Lane.
Thank you.
Okay. Actually, Luxco, and in spite of misstatements to the contrary, they have been a good neighbor to those around them where they are now, to the extent of, for any demonstrated impact of the Bedonia, which is the technical name for it. They have reimbursed neighbors in certain instances for power washing, and that program has worked very well for them. I will also state that, this alcohol dissipates in a fairly short distance. I mean, this is not a county-wide impact. It's not a mile-wide impact. It's not a half-mile-wide impact. But the company has been and will continue to be a good neighbor in those respects. And for demonstrated impact, they have reimbursed people for power washing houses up to, I think, $400 for demonstrated impact.
If you want to come forward.
Hi, my name is Kenneth Pennington. I'm of 710 Oak Ridge Road in Bardstown. Just wanted to, if anyone hasn't read the New York Times article that came out in spring of this year, 2023, the neighbors, which we're not talking about the entire community, right? We're talking about the spread of a fungus to your neighbors, your neighboring people, the people who are here, who are invited to be here because we're neighboring peoples. They spend $10,000 a year to power wash their business. And that is an expense that will run us out of town. And we moved here on purpose. We escaped the city of Louisville to come to the pastoral, amazing views and potential of regenerative agriculture and sharing food that is nutritious and beneficial with ourselves, our neighbors, and our community, our neighbors. That is not neighborly to say that we wouldn't be deserving of a full reimbursement for something that is happening after the fact. We purchased our land 3 years ago, they are building now. And we will see that happen, right? Cause and effect. So when our property values go down and our expenses go up, what do we do? And who is accountable? To me, that is not sufficient, and it definitely is not in proportion to their profits. Thank you.
Any more comments?
I hope I can make a comment. My name is Diana Edwards. I live actually at 332 Fredericktown Road, Springfield. However, my mother's home is at 4875 Springfield Road. And I have my niece with me. She also lives at that address at 4875. Of course, I grew up in Botland. My address back then, it was just Route 5. I grew up at 150 Quick Stop and then moved up the road at O'Daniel's old house. So I'm from Botland originally. So I've seen a lot of changes in the area. One thing I would like to ask, and I understand all of your positions basically are elected positions. You serve on the board, not all of them.
They're not elected, they're appointed.
They're appointed, okay. From fiscal court?
If you want to go ahead and then I'll speak.
Okay. So I would just ask if there's anything that you can do to maybe delay the process, because again, I mean, it is a Wednesday night, church night for a lot of people, 5 o'clock. It's hard to get a lot of public presence here, especially, I know, the rules and regulations of this is how many days you have to post prior to a meeting like this, but doesn't give most people enough time to plan. Before you make the decision to put this in their backyard. And I will also comment that Tullamore, I'm trying to get my daughter to move from Fisherville to Nelson County, and so we've been looking at houses, and there's actually now 3 houses up for sale in Tullamore, and this time last year you just didn't see that. So that just makes me wonder, why are they moving out? Because that's a really nice area. But before you put that into my 78-year-old mother's backyard, I would like for you all to take time. If this was your home, your backyard, do you want this in your backyard? I would say probably the answer is no. And if we want people to keep moving to Nelson County, I understand, jobs, what there is here in the community, but there's a point when surely it is enough. enough rick houses. You can't even drive through Cox's Creek now without, and again, I will say they are well done. They don't look as bad as they could, but it's just enough. We need to be known for a little bit more than rick houses throughout our county. And then, of course, has nothing to do with the address there, but you know, now you've got Manton and Fredericktown area that just passed a distillery and storage facilities. So Botland's going to be sandwiched in between more whiskey mode. So I would just like for this committee to take a little bit of time, get out, give people a chance to either come to you or come and talk and see, because it's their property values, it's their homes. They have to live with this on a daily basis. So I appreciate it if you'll think about it a little bit longer.
And I'll address your question of the planning commission. The planning commission members are, and I'm staff, so I don't have a vote. I don't have a vote. So, but they are appointed members. We do have 11 members, 2 of which we've had conflicts of interest that were not going to be participating tonight. Another one had another activity, and then another one has a sick child. So these individuals are all appointed.
Volunteers.
They are all volunteers. They get a whopping $50 a meeting, so it's not worth sitting up here a lot of times. But they are lay people. They are all citizen members of Nelson County, 5 of which are 1 from each magisterial district, appointed by the judge with approval by fiscal court. So one is from each magisterial district, 5 from the county, 3 from the city of Bardstown, appointed by the mayor with approval by city council, and then 1 each from the smaller cities of Bloomfield, Fairfield, and New Haven. And those are also appointed by the mayor and approved by their city council or city commission. So they are all lay people, just like you all, that have volunteered to serve on the planning commission. Their role is to provide the recommendation to fiscal court. Fiscal court, these are the fiscal court's regulations. They can be the final action on this decision.
Okay, thank you.
Please come forward.
Francis Lawson, 4821 Springfield Road. I had a question. You said that there's 1 from each district. Could we find out, because I don't know, the name of the committee member from our district, from the Botland?
That would be, they're not here tonight.
So they're not here.
It's Todd Johnson. All of the members of the planning commission. However, the planning commission cannot consider any evidence or testimony outside of the hearing. This board cannot consider, so you can't call the planning commissioners and talk to them outside of the hearing. That's called ex parte communications. They only can consider what is presented at the hearing. If you want to have conversations with your magistrate, you're more than welcome to do that.
Okay, will our representative, we can't speak to him regarding our opinions?
That is correct. The planning commissioners are instructed not to have conversations outside of the hearing. They are only to take, so basically they serve as judge and jury, and they only can consider what is presented on the application and what is presented through testimony and evidence at the hearing. Their role is to play judge and jury based on this. So it's called ex parte communication. They can't consider any evidence outside of the hearing.
But
your magistrates are different.
Yes.
You can contact your magistrate.
But the person with the voting right from our district is not present.
He is not present, but the way the planning commission is established, they are a joint unit. So once they're appointed, even though they represent that, once they're appointed and they serve on the joint committee, they really don't. They represent the county as a whole. Even though they're from that district and they have experience in that district, they do represent the county as a whole. So, because they're using the comprehensive plan as their basis and the regulations as a basis for their decisions.
Right, but, so clarify, this, Mr. Johnson, how will he receive information without us?
Mr. Johnson will not be voting. If he is not here tonight, he will not be voting. And unfortunately, he has a very sick child.
sorry to hear that, but, so the person who represents our area is
This
not.
board represents your.
Oh, okay.
The board as a whole is a joint board. So
Okay.
once they get appointed, they do, they're appointed from that, because the way that there are 11 members, and it was even to be able to say, we want one from every magisterial district, which gives every magistrate the right to appoint someone. But once they come on the board, their duties are to uphold the comprehensive plan, follow the comprehensive plan, KRS 100, the comprehensive plan, and then the zoning and subdivision regulations. So really, once they serve on the planning commission, not to say they're not representing an individual area, the body comes together as one unit.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone else have a comment? Come forward.
Sorry, last comment. Wilma Sorrell, 1007 Holly Drive, Barstown. One last comment that I want to pose to not only Luxco, but all the distilleries in Barstown, Nelson County. So what exactly are you doing for the community? You know, you lobbied very, very hard to get the nickel tax off the barrel. Nelson County has zero to do for families. Part of that's our fault, because people just do not take their families to those events, because we just don't have great spaces anymore for events for our families. But we have an aging population. What can you do to help our community? Indoor pool, what can you do? This would be a great time to start showing the community what these distilleries can do for our community. You make your money off of the community, the backs of the community. Start putting your money where it matters, back into the community. If you're going to build this, and let's hope that maybe you'll find another space, because we don't really want it in our neighborhood. But what are you doing for the community? We've got to figure this out. We can't just keep letting one group, which is the distillers, take and take and take and take. Eventually, guys and ladies and gentlemen, there's going to be zero to take. There's going to be zero to take. You're not going to have any more farmland to take. You're not going to have any more houses to take, because they're all going to be engulfed and engrossed in black mold or the fungus. What are we getting? What are we getting? That's one of my questions. I'm going to ask you all. I'm going to ask the attorneys. And I'm going to ask not just Luxco, but all of the distilleries. What are we getting? What are we getting? And community, ask yourselves, what are you getting? It's up to us. What are you getting? I implore you guys, before you make a decision, what is this community getting? That's my question.
Any more comments?
You want to provide a closing statement?
Yeah, if I could, please. Very briefly. The county fiscal court and the planning commission went to great effort to develop a new set of regulations for use in the siting of facilities of the type that we're talking about. They were very responsibly drafted, and narrowly focused to address the issues that are appropriate for consideration by the planning commission in siting projects of this type. Appropriate to land use questions, not the bigger issues that are well beyond anything that should be considered by this body. Luxco has met each and every one of those requirements. They have demonstrated lack of impact on the area in spite of factually unsupported and grossly overstated claims about impact of these facilities on the area. There's not been one empirical fact provided that would suggest that there's any adverse impact on the character of the area beyond what has been a common theme from every comment made, virtually every comment made before you this evening. And it all boils down to not in my backyard, and that's not an appropriate way for planning and land use to be conducted. If that were the case, they wouldn't exist anywhere. And in addition to the gross overstatements of the impact, there's been a gross understatement of the benefits to this community and to this state from the bourbon industry. There are studies that talk about the number of employees, the billions of dollars that are generated for this state as a whole, and the distilling industry as a whole, and Luxco Distillery individually are all a part of that benefit. Again, irrelevant to land use planning questions. You have identified and imposed upon Luxco after it bought the property, which the fact that they bought the property cannot indicate that this is a done deal, because they bought the property when there was no requirements. These were restrictions that were imposed afterwards. But you have imposed very finely tailored requirements. They've been met in every respect by Luxco with this application, and we think it's appropriate for you to recommend approval of the plan unit development designation.
Thank you. If there's no more questions or comments, we'll close the public hearing at this time. I'll start with you, Nathan. Do you have anything you want to add? I'm sorry?
I just had a quick comment and response.
She's already closed the public hearing, sorry.
Nathan, do you want to address it?
I guess I have a couple questions. It's my understanding, based on the information that we have here, that Luxco owns a residential lot in the neighborhood. And is that just for...
Nathan, the public hearing's been closed,
Oh,
so this
okay.
is just discussion.
Oh,
So if
okay.
I can address
No,
it.
you're good. Yeah, I mean, they're not going to have, they can't have it in residential access.
Well, they'll have it, the existing house that will stay, they said, for 5 years.
No, it's, they own a lot. It's in Oak Knoll.
Yeah, no, that lot is not part of this application, because it is zoned R1A. They're showing it on there, but it is not part of this application, because they would have to rezone that back to ag and add it to their property. So at this time, that will not be part of the development plan.
So the only discussion I have is that, as some have stated, I guess it's kind of confusing for me, because in the review findings, it says the subject property is located within the suburban residential neighborhood. So I'm kind of stuck on that. The suburban residential neighborhood aspect of this, as brought up by this gentleman over here. I do agree with, in theory, with almost everything that they presented, from the standpoint of the fact that had this occurred several months ago, that they would have been able to do whatever. I do think that's why the regulation was brought forth, to give us the opportunity to look at these. I don't think that, to me, it's hard to approve this due to the fact that it's, well, I'll just put it to like this. If this was if we had this is a residential property, surrounded by residential property, we're trying to put multifamily. And I know this is not a rezoning, but it definitely is something that changes the character from this point forward. Once this happens, the character of this area changes. And so we do have this property that is, for all intents and purposes, completely surrounded by residential use. And so I do tend to agree with this gentleman here that it seems to me that the comprehensive plan and outlining this as suburban neighborhood area is that we would be pursuing residential uses in that area that would be cohesive with suburban residential, rather than the fact that, yes, this is an agricultural zone property now, but in a rezoning for anything on this property, the rezoning party would argue that agricultural zoning is not appropriate based on the changes in the area. And so I think that's the main factor for me.
Martin?
You may tell me I'm out of order, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. I'm prepared to make a separate motion that we table the balance of the meeting. We don't have our legal representation here, and I'd like to hear their input as part of my input on making my recommendation. And now that we're at the recommendation phase, is why I'm bringing this up. So you tell me, am I out of line to table the meeting at this point?
I think probably if someone else wants to, just provide discussion, and then we could probably go back to if somebody wanted to make that motion.
Okay.
So if somebody wants else to provide, like Nathan did, their information, then we can do that. And
Doug, do you have anything you want to add to this?
I understand all your concerns, believe me. I've lived in Nelson County for since 1959, 64 years. And her argument back there's nothing to do for our families. I've heard that for 64 years. This commission, their job is to only determine land use. That's our job, based on evidence provided at this hearing. That's our only thing we have to do. Is this appropriate use of this land for this request? I don't know. I honestly do not know. The residential areas around that does bother me. Yes, it does bother me. I'll have to see what everybody else says, but I mean, if I'll tell you right now, if we take a vote, I'm going to have to say no. Because I just don't think it's appropriate for this situation.
Jim?
First, where to begin? So the biggest question I think that people have out there is the process in which we find ourselves right now. And again, I couldn't emphasize more that we are just an advising committee. We make a recommendation to those who are elected officials for them to decide whether or not this is going to pass or not us. It's either the county circuit court or it's the city council of the area that's being concerned. There's not any person on this commission that doesn't have your all's best interests at mind. It's always been, I've said it before, it's always been a battle between property rights and property rights. They buy property, they have a right to do with it what they want. You buy property, you have a right not to be infringed upon it. So it is a balance between that very two. And that's all we do, is again, we try not to, but this is nothing more than, is the land use appropriate for what it's being zoned for? Is it in compliance with the comprehensive plan that has been determined? And whether or not those things happen. Now, there are certain things that today, I understand you've got a life, you've got a living, you've got a home and a family. And that all is centered around your own property. And with that comes certain emotions. I get it. But as a commission, we have to strip ourselves from those and look at the basics and the facts. And that's why this is held like a court. It would not be right or appropriate for a commissioner here to talk to somebody about an upcoming decision or something that was brought before the commission. It would be wrong and inappropriate. It'd be almost the same as jury tampering. We can only make the decisions based on the evidence that's presented to us. And so I hope that at least minimizes or at least increases your understanding as to what the role of this commission is and the role of us up through here as well. Whether the decision is to table, that's fine. I get it, I understand it. There's a lot here to digest, and I would be for that. But at the same time, it's rights, property rights versus property rights. And that's really the issue that for me, that we're discussing. Thank you.
Mark?
You're right. I mean, it's all property rights. But this is something new here, and before this would have been gone and done, and nobody would have even known it until they started building the warehouses. And maybe that's good, maybe it wasn't. But this is the way we're going to do it now. Everybody's got a voice, and all your voices have been heard. And we're going to decide one way or another. It might not be tonight. I don't think we ought to decide on tonight. I think there's a lot to digest here. A lot of information. It's all new to us. I mean, the rules are the rules, and if they go by them, it's going to be hard to turn them down, even though we're going back to being a suburban area. I think that's going to be a problem overall, just in my opinion. But other than that, I hope everybody that's here thinks that their voice has been heard. If it hadn't, I think it's your own fault, because we're here to listen. That's our job. So I'll be all for tabling it. I think we've heard you.
Jacob?
I would say I appreciate the testimony and evidence of the applicant. There's been a lot of considerations, jobs, taxes, whiskey fungus, but ultimately the Planning Commission only considers land use is the only thing that we really look at. And we have a guiding charter called the Comprehensive Plan, which maps out where we envision the county in so many years, what different types of areas should be designated for different types of zonings, et cetera. And like Nathan pointed out, and the gentleman from Florida, or from Louisville, excuse me. Yeah, I don't think this agrees with the comprehensive plan. I think it's in a suburban residential area it's surrounded. And so, I would just have to disagree with this application.
I would say I would have to agree with most of our staff and commission here. We have taken in a whole lot of information tonight, and I don't know that I feel like we need a little more time to look over this.
If I could say one more thing, again, I would have to agree with what Mark said too. The fact that we do not have our legal counsel here tonight, and I think we could really use that expertise. I would go along with his idea of table this, mainly for that reason. Because I think we need legal counsel.
If so, a motion is ready to be entertained.
I'll make a motion to table the hearing where it is. We've got all the evidence and everything, so it can be reviewed by primarily the legal counsel, but it can be digested a little bit more before we come back with a final motion, one way or the other.
I need a second.
I second that.
We have a second. All in favor, raise your hands. Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries.
So this will be placed on the Planning Commission's, I'll have to talk to our legal counsel about notification requirements. If possible, it will be on the Planning Commission's regular scheduled meeting on September 26th at 6 p.m. There will not be a notice sent out if that's the case, so if you'll please mark that down if you're interested in coming to the meeting. No additional testimony or evidence will be presented at that meeting. It's still a public meeting, so you can come to the meeting, you can hear the discussion. Our legal counsel will be at that meeting, September 26th, 6 o'clock at the fiscal courtroom. We may move it back down here considering there's more room here, but we'll have it out on I'll put it out on the Nelson County Gazette. And so if you'll keep it there, and then if you have, I know Botland's got a Facebook page, so if somebody will contact us within the next week, we'll get it out there on the Botland page as well. So, but no additional testimony and evidence, September 26th, 6 p.m. Thank you. Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.